Most people know Doc Holliday from movies, where he appears as the fearless gambler, quick with a pistol and sharper with his tongue. But the real man was far more complicated, shaped less by bravado and more by survival in a world where money, politics, and reputation carried as much weight as bullets. His story isn't a simple duel between good and evil. It's about how a sickly Southern dentist became one of the most infamous figures of the Old West by adapting to brutal realities Hollywood rarely shows. Number 1. How illness drove the legend. Doc Holliday wasn't fearless by nature. He was a sick man learning how to live with a disease that never gave him a day off. In the 1870s, tuberculosis meant a hard cough, fever, night sweats, weight loss, and deep fatigue. And there was no antibiotic to fix it. Doctors mostly prescribed rest, clean air, and drier climates because that was the best they had before modern medicine caught up. He trained as a dentist in Philadelphia, came home to Georgia, and tried to work like everyone else, but constant coughing made chairside work nearly impossible. When physicians told patients to seek high, dry places, he listened, heading west to salvage his lungs and his career, rather than to chase gunfights. In Texas and other frontier towns, he kept trying to practice, then shifted to gambling because the hours and the setting fit his limits. A table, a chair, and a room he could study without burning energy. The cool tone people remember, low voice, steady hands, short sentences, wasn't swagger. It was a way to save breath and finish trouble before it dragged into a fight he couldn't win. The science of the time explains his choices. Robert Koch identified the microbe that causes TB only in 1882. So most care still revolved around climate therapy and sanatoria models, fresh air, altitude, and long rest. New Mexico and other southwestern destinations actively sold themselves to health seekers, which is why Holliday kept moving along that dry air corridor when symptoms flared. Day to day, he built a routine that cut risk. He preferred indoor night work over cold streets that triggered coughing fits. He picked seats with cover and exits. He avoided wrestling brawls and ended confrontations quickly because a long struggle cost more air than he could spare. At the Faro layout, success depended on memory and calm. And both aligned with how he had to live. Read the room, move once, be done. When the disease advanced, he followed the same medical logic to Colorado's hot springs, a common last try for relief in that era. He died in Glenwood Springs in 1887, far from any heroic movie ending, because the truth was never about theatrics. It was about a man rationing breath, time, and effort to buy a few more years. That quiet economy is what made him look unshakable. It wasn't a pose, it was survival. Number 2, the Faro table, where he really made money. Forget the noon showdowns. Doc Holliday paid his bills at a green-covered Faro layout, where the game moved fast, the rules were simple to watch, and the room could turn dangerous in seconds. Faro in the Old West ran on a printed layout showing the 13 card ranks, a single 52-card deck, and a dealer who was also the banker. Each turn, the first card dealt favored the house, the second favored the players, so regulars tracked what had fallen and what was left. A small abacus-like counter called a case keep helped everyone count ranks still in the box, and a copper token could flip a bet's direction, details that made the game feel fair, while keeping it quick and loud enough to draw a crowd. Because a straight Faro bank offered only a thin edge for the house. Cheating was common on both sides. Players slid chips at the last instant, or tugged stacks with a hair-fine thread. Crooked dealers used gaffed boxes that let them glimpse or skip the next card. In that environment, a good dealer wasn't a carnival barker. He was security, referee, and accountant at once. That's the job Doc learned across boom towns like Fort Griffin, Dodge City, and Tombstone. Talk low, so tempers stay down, move slow, so every payout looks clean. Watch hands and faces more than mouths, and shut down trouble before it spills. The Gambler's War in Tombstone shows how much money and pressure sat on those tables. The Oriental Saloon's Faro concession was valuable enough to spark rivalries, and Doc's 1880 blow-up with owner Milt Joyce after an earlier clash with gambler Johnny Tyler ended with injuries, court time, and a hardened reputation. Around the same period, Wyatt Earp himself managed or held a cut of faro at the Oriental, and testimony from the Spicer hearing even mentions the man that is dealing my game, closing up for the night evidence that gambling wasn't a side gag. It was the nighttime economy. Doc carried a pistol less to hunt gunfights than to protect the bank when a drunk loser reached for a blade or a brace of friends. A table full of cash on payday invited bad decisions. On good nights, discipline and fast arithmetic turned the layout into steady income. On bad ones, the same calm reading angles, keeping cover, ending a dispute quickly, kept him alive. Strip away the movie pose, and you see the real craft. A sick, razor-focused professional running a high-risk cash business, where math, etiquette, and deterrence mattered more than swagger. Number 3. Unwritten rules of a violent town. In real boomtowns like Tombstone, the difference between a busy saloon and a bloodbath rested on a mix of city ordinances and house rules everyone was expected to understand. The formal layer was simple. Inside town limits, carrying deadly weapons was restricted by law. Tombstone's Ordinance No. 9, April 19, 1881, is a clear example. Pistols, knives, and rifles had to be checked with the sheriff, a livery, or a cooperating business soon after entering town, with permits as narrow exceptions. Dodge City and other cattle towns posted the policy in plain view. Period photos show carrying of firearms strictly prohibited signs because merchants wanted streets where families and paying customers felt safe. Legal historians call this firearm localism. Incorporated towns used police power to keep commerce stable, even while open carry remained normal outside city limits. On top of that sat the unwritten code that governed crowded rooms after dark. Games like faro ran on quiet, order, and confidence. Dealers and housemen enforced simple rules. No handling the layout once the card turned. Settle small debts immediately. Take disputes to the table boss before temper spread. And never reach for steel to argue money. Regulars knew the Sequence 1 warning in a calm voice, a hard stare if needed, and then swift removal if a cheater or a drunk threatened the room. Roles blurred because the economy demanded it. A man might work a badge by day, manage a gambling concession at night, and hire trusted shootists to keep the green cloth attractive to high rollers. That is why Wyatt Earp took a quarter interest in the Oriental Saloon's faro concession. In 1881, security, order, and revenue were linked, and why Doc Holliday's reputation mattered to proprietors. His way of keeping the peace matched the environment. Sit where there's cover, and an exit. Talk low to conserve breath. Resolve trouble fast so a brawl doesn't wreck the house's earnings. The town laws gave legal cover to disarm armed men on the street. The saloon code kept tensions from turning into chair-smashing chaos inside. Enforcement was never perfect, and sometimes reflected politics, but the structure worked often enough for businesses to operate late into the night. Seen through that lens, Doc wasn't just a gunman at large. He was a specialist operating inside a civic and commercial system that rewarded steady hands, short warnings, and minimal noise. Exactly the traits a chronically ill gambler could deliver in a place where reputation did most of the preventative work. Number 4, money, politics, and badges. Tombstone ran on silver and fees, not on movie morals, and Doc Holliday's world sat right where business, law, and crime collided. The Silver Strike turned a remote camp into a boomtown almost overnight, with mines pulling out millions of ounces and a population surge that filled hotels, saloons, and faro rooms. That cash flow is why order mattered. Violence scared paying customers and threatened investors. Inside town limits, gambling wasn't a side hustle. It was licensed revenue. Sheriffs issued gaming permits and collected monthly fees, and faro concessions inside big rooms like the Oriental were valuable businesses with partners, security, and payrolls. Wyatt Earp himself held a quarter interest as manager-enforcer, a very normal arrangement for the era. That set the stage for political friction. Cochise County's elected sheriff answered to county voters and budgets. The city's marshal enforced council ordinances inside town, including the 1881 ban on carrying deadly weapons in public without a permit, passed to keep streets calm for commerce. When you put those together, county fees tied to saloons and tables, city rules aimed at tamping down gunplay, you get overlapping jurisdictions and clashing incentives, especially once headlines and elections enter the room. The cowboys weren't a single gang with uniforms. They were a loose network of rustlers and stage robbers working routes that linked mines, ranches, and the railhead. And every robbery or border raid threatened freight, bullion shipments, and the confidence merchants needed to keep tills open. That's why lawmen, gamblers, and business owners often ended up on the same side of a fight. Stable nights meant open tables and steady tax receipts. In that climate, newspapers took sides, shaping public pressure. The epitaph usually backed town interests and stricter enforcement. Its rival, the Nugget and county factions, often hit back, accusing the other camp of profiteering. The result was a feedback loop: editorials, court hearings, and street confrontations, all rising from the same economic base. When the March 1881 Benson Stage murders escalated tensions, every stake grew. City officers pushed gun ordinances and patrols. The sheriff's office faced questions about jailbreaks and prosecutions. Gamblers and saloon owners defended their concessions against rivals and disruptors. After the famous 30 seconds of gunfire that October, Judge Wells Spicer's ruling didn't knight heroes. It recognized the reality of a boomtown with an existence of a law-defying element, and concluded the officers, including Holliday as an assistant, acted within duty under frontier conditions. The takeaway isn't a clean hero-villain split. It's a money system licenses, taxes, freighting, and mines-pushing badges and businesses into the same coalition, with Doc working as a specialist whose livelihood depended on rooms staying predictable. Number 5. 30 Seconds in Tombstone, reconstructed. The gunfight at the OK Corral is one of the most famous events of the American Old West. But when you strip away the Hollywood slow motion, the clever one-liners, and the myth of a perfectly staged duel, what remains is a short, chaotic, and deadly clash in a cramped lot on Fremont Street. On October 26, 1881, tensions between the Earp brothers and the Cowboys had been building for months. The dispute was not simply about personal grudges. It was about enforcing a Tombstone City ordinance that prohibited carrying firearms within town limits. Merchants and city leaders wanted stability in a boomtown built on silver mining, but the Cowboys' loosely organized ranchers and rustlers like the Clanton and McClory brothers resented the Earps' authority. When the two groups finally confronted each other, the outcome wasn't a planned showdown, but the product of weeks of threats, accusations of stagecoach robberies, and heavy drinking the night before. The physical space matters to understanding what happened. It wasn't an open main street, but a narrow lot near a boarding house, with fences, horses, and bystanders crowding the edges. Virgil Earp, the city marshal, carried a revolver in one hand and a cane in the other because of a recent injury. Wyatt had his own pistol. Morgan Earp was armed as well, while Doc Holliday carried a short, double-barreled shotgun that Virgil had given him just minutes earlier. Across from them stood Billy Clanton and Frank and Tom McClory. Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne were nearby, but unarmed or unwilling to join once the shooting started. Eyewitnesses never agreed on who fired the first shot. Some said it was Billy Clanton, others swore it was Doc Holliday. What everyone agreed on was how fast the fight unfolded. Once the first trigger was pulled, the rest fired almost instantly. Holliday's shotgun blast was one of the earliest shots, and Tom McClory fell either from that blast or shortly afterward. In such close quarters, the shotgun was devastating, and Holliday, sick but calculating, had chosen the most effective weapon for a man who couldn't afford a prolonged exchange. The lot filled with gun smoke so thick that visibility dropped. In those 30 seconds, bullets flew in every direction. Morgan Earp was hit across the back and shoulders, Virgil took a wound to the leg, and Doc was grazed in the hip. On the other side, Billy Clanton and Frank McClory kept fighting despite being mortally wounded. By the end, Billy was shot multiple times, Frank was down, and Tom was dead. 3 cowboys lay dying, while the Earps and Doc though injured, remained standing. Ike Clanton, who had shouted threats all night, had fled without firing a shot. Afterward, Tombstone split into two camps. Some saw the Earps and Holliday as lawmen doing their duty to enforce a city ordinance. Others accused them of murder, claiming the cowboys had been trying to comply when the shooting started. The hearing that followed lasted for weeks, with contradictory testimony from witnesses shaped by politics, alliances, and fear. Judge Wells Spicer ultimately ruled that Virgil Earp, acting as marshal, and those assisting him, had acted within their authority under the law. It wasn't a heroic declaration. It was a legal acknowledgement that in a tense town full of weapons, sudden violence could happen under the banner of duty. For Doc Holliday, the fight sealed his reputation. He wasn't the star of the scene delivering memorable lines, but the man who carried the weapon that changed the balance in the first seconds. To Hollywood, it was an opportunity for drama. To the people who lived in Tombstone, it was a reminder of how quickly a saloon quarrel or political dispute could turn into a bloodbath. The real story is messy, filled with smoke, noise, fear, and uncertainty. A half-minute of violence that has been stretched into a century of legend. Number 6. What Hollywood Got Wrong. Doc Holliday's real life doesn't match the movie poster, and understanding the gaps makes his story clearer and more interesting. He wasn't a superhuman gunfighter who lived for showdowns. He was a trained dentist from Georgia who turned to gambling when tuberculosis made steady clinical work impossible, and most of his income came from faro tables, not the end of a barrel. The famous swagger is mostly a health strategy mistaken for style. A quiet voice and minimal movement conserve breath when your lungs are damaged. And ending trouble fast is better than letting it drag into a wrestling match you can't finish. The OK Corral fight wasn't a choreographed duel at high noon, but a cramped, half-minute explosion in a narrow lot after days of threats, local ordinances about carrying guns in town, and a tangle of business interests around saloons, stages, and silver. In that space, a short, double-barreled shotgun is the practical tool for one decisive blast, which is exactly why Doc carried one that day. Efficiency, not theatrics, kept him alive. The body count myth doesn't stand up either. His reputation for finishing what he started did more to prevent fights than to rack up kills, and the verified incidents are far fewer than campfire numbers suggest. The catchphrase most people quote, "I'm your huckleberry," is a screenwriter's gift, not a documented line from 1881, and it distracts from what really made people wary of him. A steady gaze, fast decisions, and a willingness to act if someone pushed the room toward chaos. Hollywood also sandpapers away the economics that drove choices in Tombstone. Lawmen often had business stakes, county and city powers overlapped, and newspapers picked sides. Gamblers like Doc aligned with whoever kept the streets calm and the night trade moving, because that stability paid their rent. His relationship with Big Nose Kate wasn't a simple melodrama either. It was a hard partnership that swung between loyalty and conflict, shaped by pressure, travel, and the rough legal culture of boomtowns. Even his end is usually told wrong. He didn't go out in a blaze on the trail. He died at 36 in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, a health resort town built around hot springs, after years of chasing climate therapy across the Southwest, because that was the best medicine available before antibiotics. The boots on image makes a good poster. The reality. A frail man noticing his bare feet reveals how far the legend is from the person. If you put the money back in the frame, add the city gun ordinances, keep the illness front and center, and remember that his day job was managing tense rooms under gaslight. His choices look consistent. Pick positions with cover and exits, depend on a small circle of reliable friends, use a calm voice to set boundaries, and if someone threatens the table or the people under your protection, move once and end it. That's not a myth. That's a working method built by a sick, skilled professional who knew he was short on time and acted accordingly.